Welcome to the Greater Montana Foundation Legacy Project, preserving the history of Montana broadcasting and the pioneers of communication whose vision and foresight brought together the people of Montana.
Hi, I'm Dan Snyder, a member of the Board of Trustees of the Greater Montana Foundation. This is a project of the Greater Montana Foundation and the Montana Historical Society to record for posterity the pioneers and legends of broadcast while they're still alive. And there are two of us here today. I'm a member of the former member of the Broadcasters Hall of Fame, and along with me is another member of the Greater Montana Foundation, Bill Whitsitt. And Bill is got an interesting career, and it's very interesting to me because it's personal. So I'm going to interview Bill. He's already interviewed me, and we'll see what comes out of the two of us. But
it'll be fun, no doubt.
It'll be fun, no doubt. Well, Bill, first of all, welcome.
Thank you.
And it's nice to have you as a person being interviewed instead of an interviewer. And I don't suppose that's happened to you too often.
Well, Dan, not too recently,
Okay.
except for a few news clips now and then. But this brings back lots of memories of being in a studio lots of times doing what you're doing.
Yes. You've been a great addition to the Greater Montana Foundation with your knowledge of broadcasting and with what our goals and objectives are. And they are, of course, to make broadcasting better in the long run, in a nutshell. But let's find out about you personally that people may not know. First of all, where were you born?
I was actually born, Dan, in North Carolina. My dad was in the service, and so we traveled around both overseas and the U.S. And I like to tell people that I got to Montana as quick as I could. And that was in high school. And so I went to high school in Great Falls. My dad was stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base. And then due to, among other things, broadcast interest and some things, I ended up staying in Great Falls, going to now the University of Great Falls, and getting my first broadcasting jobs there.
Your first broadcasting job was where and doing what?
Well, actually, very interesting question. The first non-paying broadcast job was at your station, at KUDI at the time. I used to hang out in the afternoons after school at the radio station because I was just intrigued by these disc jockeys and I liked the music, and so I got to know some of them and they got to see me come over there and just kind of hang out. And finally I said to the program director one day, I said, "Do you think I could do a Great Falls High School radio show?" I was a junior in high school at the time. And he didn't think that was such a great idea on a top 40 radio station at the time, but I just kept pestering him and finally said, okay, one evening a week we'll do 15 minutes of high school radio. And he said, but it can't just be Great Falls High, we have to do Central High too, and suddenly we had competition. And so we ended up doing Bison Review for 15 minutes every week on Wednesday night, I think. And I'll never forget the sheer panic of being on the air the first time. And I mean, I think we've all experienced some of that at one time or another. But that was my first non-paying job. And from that, KFBB actually offered me a weekend stint, still in high school. And so I would go in on Saturdays and Sundays and cue up the programs that they played and do some disc jockeying, learned how to read news and that kind of thing, and did that until KUDI came back to me. I guess they thought I was trained enough when, as a freshman in college, they came back and asked me if I'd actually do a DJ shift. And so that's how I got my first paying jobs in radio at the time.
What was there about DJing that you wanted to do? Why were you enamored with that idea?
Well, to start out, it was just fascinating that these guys at the time, there weren't any women doing it at KUDI at the time, were able to connect with people through that microphone, and we would listen to them on the radio and have fun, and they became part of our lives, and it was, to me, just fascinating that they could do that. And so I was more intrigued than anything. And of course, one of the benefits came later. Once I became a DJ, I realized there were also some girls that I'd like to date that thought I was pretty cool for being a DJ. So that was the added benefit.
Okay, all right. All right, what year was that?
That would have been in 1964 that I started as a full-time DJ in college, also going to college at the time, worked my way through college in Great Falls, being a DJ until, well, halfway through college. But that's when your path and my path crossed, and I actually ended up going to KRTV and trying television, first as an announcer, and then shortly after that as a newsman.
Well, in 1964, you were spinning records. What records were you spinning then?
Well, Dan, I was the first DJ in Montana, as far as I know, to play a Beatles song. And that would have been even before the full-time gig, because we had a distributor who had some connections in Canada, and in Canada, they were playing a song called Please Please Me by this British group. And so he gave me a copy, and we played it, and so I like to claim the Beatles fame in Montana anyway.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
I didn't know that about you. See, I'm finding out new things.
Not many people do know that.
Okay. All right. In addition to the Beatles, what else did you play?
Oh, well, there was the Dave Clark Five and all of the Bobby Vinton and all of those, top 40 tunes at the time. And radio was great, but as I know you'll remember, our station on a Sunday night, when I was away from the station, wasn't my shift, actually caught fire and burned down. And I, at that point, began to reconsider this future in radio that I had, because the only thing we could do several weeks later was get back on the air in a trailer in the parking lot. And I think we used one of your old transmitters to put the signal back on the air, and I thought, I probably need to try something else here. Need to graduate.
So along comes this phone call.
Yes, and I'll always appreciate the fact that you saw something in me that I don't think I saw in terms of television and being an announcer. I'm not sure you know that the first time I was on the air, I hyperventilated. This was the days of live TV, and I know Don Bradley had me coached and all that. But I was going to do an announcer thing, and it was a commercial for, as I remember, a grocery store during one of the movie events in the evening on a weekend. And I completely hyperventilated. There was no way I could say the first sentence of what I was to say. And I was, of course, terribly embarrassed at the time. I think it's funny now. And the switcher, the engineer at the time, finally just had to go to black, as we called it, just take the picture off, because I was there huffing and puffing trying to get my breath. But we tried it again a half hour later, and it worked fine, and from there things got a lot better. So.
Now, I don't remember why, but I knew that I wanted to start an evening newscast, and so I don't know why, except that I had the feeling that there was something more in you than just being a DJ, and I mean, in the interviews that we had, you had a certain amount of judgment that came through. That was, you could tell the difference between a teenager who's got wide eyes about the show business, or someone who's looking for something. You just told me you were looking for something more, and so was I. So that was a marriage of some kind or another. But at any rate, I asked you to be my news director. What was your reaction to that?
Well, I said I'd never been a news director. And your reaction to that was, we've never had a news director either. So it was really a nice convergence. And it.
Well, there was one other thing to it, and that is I was happy that you weren't a news director or and so forth, because you wouldn't have any preconceived ideas of what should be done.
Interesting.
So you developed your own style without my input. You did it yourself, and you did it a little bit at a time, and then you did a little bit more, and then you blossomed.
Well, thanks for that, and thanks for the confidence at the time. I will say, Dan, that in that period where I was trying my wings as a news reporter and a news anchor and trying to conceptually figure out what we should be providing in that whole space, I did develop a passion and real curiosity about where journalism was going. And in fact, as you know, eventually I applied for and was very fortunate to have, on the second try, been awarded a CBS News fellowship to go to CBS for a year to go to graduate school and to study. They didn't want us to really study journalism, but I did take some journalism from, of all people, Fred Friendly, who was a famous CBS News president, who had then gone on to Columbia, and American government. And because CBS had a philosophy at the time that they wanted their news people that they assumed knew how to report news to become better reporters by understanding some subject matter in addition to just the mechanics of journalism. And it was the marriage of those two things at Columbia that really defined in many ways the rest of my career. One foot in the journalism camp, one foot in a government relations or government camp. Actually spent some time on Capitol Hill, as you know. So I look back at that time at KRTV as a very transformational period in my life and my career. And I often think, and I've told my kids this too, that sometimes things come along in life, and if you seize the opportunity, it may not be your doing, it may be whether it's providence or whether it's people believing in you, to step out with a little bit of courage, and you might be pleasantly surprised at where that takes you and what the direction is that you may never have dreamed. And certainly that was the case for me.
Well, you were at KRTV when we converted from black and white to color. And as you will recall, we had that first color camera, which was about like that in length and about like that in width. It had 3 tubes in it, one green, one blue, and one red. And it was a mixture of the 3 that brought out the color. And that gigantic camera in our studio was quite a thing to see. So I thought that as an introduction to color, live color with news and everything, that I would have an open house. So I invited, as you may remember, clients and close friends to witness a live television broadcast of you doing news. Now, I have to preface that by saying you were probably the most dedicated news person that ever could exist, because nothing seemed to faze you. And the reason I tell that story is because conceived by the girls on the staff while you were standing up reading the news, that they should see if they could break you up on the air. So they came over one by one, first on one cheek and then on the other cheek. I have to tell everyone that you never cracked a smile. You kept going as though it didn't happen. I couldn't believe it.
I didn't know what else to do. I was petrified. Now, today I would handle it probably a lot differently, but it was an experience. And in fact, one of my most treasured possessions is the certificate that I was given by the staff when I left KRTV. And the first line of it says, "The only guy to be kissed by a bevy of beauties live on television and never break up." I mean, to this day, I treasure it.
Yeah. Well, that was quite a thing to see. Yeah. Now, as you know, I eventually sold the station, and it was kind of a difficult thing to do, but I was going through some difficult times with a divorce. You know that whole story. But along with it, my favorite people stayed with the station, and of course the person that I sold it to, we negotiated for 18 months, and that was Joe Sample, who owned the billing station and the Butte station. And Joe offered you the job of news director of the Montana Television Network, and you were the first news director. What was that like?
Well, Dan, that was an amazing period as well, and of course building on the experience that we had with KRTV, with not only the program content, but knowing, because we networked with other stations around the state,
Yeah.
in terms of Broadcasters Association,
Sure.
everything, we were able to put together a concept that was really fascinating, where we would have these linked stations, each contributing news to a statewide broadcast, and then also doing local news. And so it was thinking outside the box, certainly, but building on what we had done to that point. And I'm very pleased that as we're sitting here taping, we're doing it in an MTN affiliate, and we know that MTN is doing quite well, and in many ways it charted, as a network and also as a news operation, it charted a course for other states to do very similar things. I think Montana was, if not the first, about the second in the country to try to link these stations up and really magnify what we were all about.
Now let's go back and talk about the CBS Fellowship and your stay in Washington, D.C. Something happened after you got your master's degree.
Well, a lot happened. I got an offer after I came back to MTN, actually, I got an offer to go to D.C. and be a congressional staff member, which I did, and thoroughly enjoyed that opportunity and learned from it. And that, again, built on the CBS Fellowship, because it seemed to me to be just a logical extension to see if, in practice, these things that we studied about American government really happened that way. And so I was in Washington, I assume this is what you're talking about, for 5 years, and then eventually was hired to go and create a government affairs group in Dallas, Texas, for Sun Gas Company at the time, and began to apply what I had learned in both broadcasting and in government to trying to represent this company in Washington eventually. So,
But by now you now have a doctor's degree, a PhD.
well, that came a little bit later. While I was with Sun, they funded that, and again I was back in the process of working and going to school. Ended up with a PhD in public administration, but with a focus on esoteric area of public policy formulation dynamics. In other words, what causes policy to get adopted and implemented, even if we think it's nutty, and why do some of the best policy ideas that you and I might have never see the light of day? And to me, that was just another intellectual challenge, and then I ended up teaching that. After I got my degree, they asked me at George Washington University to stay on and teach a course in that, which I did for about a dozen years. And that's still a passion of mine today.
Well, you did such a great job with Sun Oil that you established a reputation, and that reputation, maybe that was part and parcel of you setting up your own consulting firm.
I did, Dan, and actually it was an interesting time as well, because setting it up was really something I never thought about doing. After Sun, and a couple of its subsidiaries that I was an officer of, a vice president, I was asked by Skadden Arps, which is a very large, it was I think the largest law firm in the world at the time, to create a government affairs group in its Washington office. And so I did that and ran it for a couple of years, and then got the call from the fellow who was later to be my boss at Devon Energy, who headed up an association at the time, and he asked me if I would represent the association, and I agreed to do it. I said that would be fine, that'd be a great client to have. And the next day he called back and said, "Bill, there's a problem." He said, all the directors, I polled the directors of this association of companies like ours, like Sun and like Devon, and he said, they all love you, want you to do this, but they're nervous that doing it in a law firm causes all kinds of conflict of interest problems. Would you mind going out and creating your own business to represent us? And I never forget, I called Christy and I said, "Chris, Larry Nichols called and he wants me to quit my job." And on the hope that I can get other clients as well as theirs. And so we took the flyer. And Christy said, "Well, if you think that is possible, do it." And I did, and the good news was a number of my clients from Skadden came with me, and so it really was a smooth transition. And fast forward, and most recently I was then asked by Larry to go to Oklahoma City and be part of the executive team of his company, which I did for 5 years, and then as we tape this, I've been retired from that job for about 6 weeks. So I'm not sure what this retirement thing looks like, but anyway, that's sort of the rest of the story.
But during that time, you were tapped to join the Board of Trustees of the Greater Montana Foundation. Tell us about that.
Well, Dan, that was one of the most gratifying things that could have happened to me, because I had always valued tremendously the time in broadcasting here in Montana. And so a dozen or so years ago, when I was asked, when I was still living in Washington, but asked to be a member of the Board of Trustees, I was both honored and a little curious about how that was going to work out, because I did want to continue and had continued to stay in touch with and be part of Montana broadcasting from afar. But over the last dozen years, the Greater Montana Foundation, I think, not because of me, but just because of the quality of the group of trustees we have, has moved to really take even more and more seriously the promotion of excellence in broadcasting in Montana. And that means commercial stations, and of course we do also support the public stations. But I think our real focus is to make sure that we are as supportive as possible through the good work and the vision and the funding initially by Ed Craney to really promote improved broadcasting in Montana. We all have to be about continuous improvement, and that's what we're about.
Now, you're a Montanan now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you built a house.
We are at Big Fork, and we love it. It is great to be back in Montana, and I think we're going to do our part to improve the tourism industry in Montana, because we want all of our friends from Dallas and Washington and all over the country to come see us and experience Montana. It's a special place, and we're delighted to be here.
You have a wonderful wife. Tell us about your wife and your family.
Well, Christy, my wife, was born and raised on a cattle ranch just outside of Moore, which is outside of Lewistown in central Montana. And we have 4 kids, and we are constantly amazed and blessed that they are doing well. Our eldest is a girl. She's a prosecutor in Wisconsin. Our next oldest is a boy, and he's just been selected to be a Navy captain, and he's in charge of the Navy's international engagement programs. And we've got a middle son who has got his first architect job in Bethesda, Maryland, and he's a design architect, and he builds furniture for a hobby and for a little extra income on the side. And then we've got our youngest son, who is a Navy SEAL officer, and as you and I speak, he is leading a platoon somewhere in a dangerous part of the world. So, we say our prayers for him, but
Yes.
all of the kids have surprised us. They've done very well, and of course all of us have had rough spots in our lives. They have from time to time, but we're proud of them, as I know you are of your children, and so they're all doing well.
Now, you have seen over the years technological changes, and you've also seen changes in deregulation. You want to comment?
I do, Dan. Because one of the areas that I'm very interested in is what the new or the current news and public affairs paradigm looks like, and some of its blessings, which technology and speed and diversity. There's a flip side to all of this. The technology and the speed and the diversity have really caused there to be fewer professionals in journalism who can help put things in context compared to those who like to hold themselves out as journalists, for example. And it's more incumbent upon all of us as citizens now to be careful that what we see and hear in the broadcast media or in print is viewed as what it is, either factual or not. And that's a high bar. Sometimes we see things that we assume are true just because they're on the internet or they're on television, and they're absolutely not true. The other issue that I have is one of the 24/7 need to just fill time and space. And sometimes I think that puts journalists under impossible demands.
Okay. You've been listening to Bill Whitsitt, former news director of the Montana Television Network, and now a member of the Board of Trustees of the Greater Montana Foundation. On behalf of the GMF and the Montana Historical Society, I'm Dan Snyder. Thanks for watching.
This programming series is brought to you by the Greater Montana Foundation, benefiting the people of Montana through communication of issues, trends, and values of importance for present and future generations of Montanans. And by the Montana Historical Society, Big Sky, Big Land, Big History. And with the help of Cordillera Communications, with stations in Billings, Bozeman, Butte, Great Falls, Missoula, Kalispell, and Helena. Cordillera Communications, the Montana Television Network.